Some voices seemed destined for glory. But for Mia Zapata, that very voice led to an ending that could not have been more different. She was the soul of the band, the Gits, a rising name during the Seattle wave of the early 1990s. Yet on a summer night, her body was discovered on an empty street at only 27 years old. A powerful voice, silenced, a singer on the verge of success, gone in the heart of the city with no witnesses. The case files left behind more questions than answers, 80 minutes unaccounted for. A letter with the words, "The dark shadow always follows me," and details that were never explained. This was not just a crime. It was the tragedy of a generation, and a mystery that still lingers. Stay with me as we uncover what really happened to Mia Zapata. Chapter 1. The Letter About Darkness in a Childhood of Comfort. When going through old belongings in Louisville, Mia's family found an envelope tucked inside one of her notebooks. On it were the words, "The dark shadow always follows me." No one knew when it was written, or even who it was meant for. But from that moment, her story begins to unfold. Mia Catherine Zapata was born in 1965 into a family rooted in media. Her parents held steady jobs and were financially comfortable. She grew up without material struggles. Yet from an early age, Mia turned to music as her anchor. She began piano lessons at 9 years old. Instead of focusing only on classical pieces, Mia listened to Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday, and Ray Charles. She recorded her own voice on old tape machines, replayed the recordings, and revised her lyrics as she sang along. A friend remembered Mia once giving him a cassette. Side A was labeled blue. Side B was left blank. When they played it, the quality was poor, filled with static. Not long after, the tape disappeared and no one ever saw it again. At Catholic school, rules were strict. Uniforms, schedules, and conduct had to be followed without exception. But Mia let her curls fall naturally, wore ripped jeans, and always carried a small notebook of lyrics. Teachers called her difficult to manage. Friends said she was magnetic, yet unpredictable. Music for Mia was never just a pastime. She wrote lines about loss and death when she was only 16 or 17. One close friend recalled, "She once told me, 'I don't think I'll live very long.' We laughed it off, thinking she was being too dark. Now, that memory haunts me." Within the family, Mia was expected to study hard and build a stable career. Outside, she sought out fellow music lovers, spending time in cheap cafes rather than fancy parties. That lifestyle slowly distanced her from her parents' hopes. Relatives believed Mia carried two sides. At home, she was polite and quiet. In public, she burst open with energy, singing at student gatherings and experimenting with her own songs. A letter, a cassette, and words about darkness. All of it suggests Mia carried thoughts far heavier than her years. Was the phrase, "the dark shadow," in her letter simply youthful melancholy? Or was it an early warning of what lay ahead for Mia? Chapter 2. A voice that shook the room, yet remained alone. In the spring of 1986, during an open mic night at Antioch College, Mia stepped up to sing. No one quite agreed on what song she performed, but many remembered being stunned by the sheer weight of her voice at just 20 years old. From that moment, the journey of the Gits began. 2 years earlier, in 1984, Mia had left Louisville for Antioch, carrying with her a guitar, a notebook of lyrics, and old recordings from her high school days. At Antioch, she met Matt Dresner, Andy Kessler, and Steve Moriarty. The four quickly bonded and formed a band. They rehearsed in dorm rooms, shared the work of writing songs, and began playing around campus. They chose the name The Gits, raw, unpolished, and defiant. By 1989, they had driven to Seattle and moved into a shared house that doubled as a practice space, later nicknamed the Rat House by friends. Without a record label behind them, they printed their own flyers and booked small shows themselves. As one member put it, "We weren't part of the scene at the time, so we had to do everything on our own." Seattle was rising then, with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden defining the new wave. In the middle of it all, the Gits carved out their own path. They drove old cars up and down the West Coast, performing in small bars and borrowed halls. Hardship built their resilience. The Gits live shows grew more powerful with every stop, and Mia was always at the center. Her voice raspy, cutting, a blend of blues, soulfulness, and punk energy. In 1992, they released their debut album, Frenching the Bully, through an independent label. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it earned the Gits recognition. Soon, they were invited to share stages with Sublime, Green Day, and Nirvana. Their schedule grew heavier, and their name began appearing in small music magazines. Yet a sense of isolation lingered. A Seattle friend recalled Mia once saying, "We're never going to be part of them." It sounded like an admission of distance from the Seattle scene, even as success drew closer. Later, friends remembered Mia playing old high school tapes at the Rat House, including one marked blue on side A. The recording was filled with static. No one kept the tape, and to this day, no one knows if it disappeared before or after the band moved. In that makeshift house, while the band fought to build its own way, Mia quietly held on to fragments of the past. A letter about a dark shadow. A cassette labeled blue with fading sounds. Small details, perhaps, but ones impossible to ignore when looking back. The question remains, when did that tape vanish? Before everything took off, or right when the band's name began to rise? Chapter 3. 80 minutes, missing in the middle of the city. From about 2 o'clock until 3:20 in the morning, no one knew where Mia went, or who she might have seen. 80 minutes were unaccounted for. Just hours earlier, she had rehearsed with a friend, then stopped at the Comet Tavern in Capitol Hill. On the night of July 6th, moving into the early hours of July 7th, 1993, Mia was there, talking, having a few drinks. Many people who knew her were in the bar that night, from fellow musicians to neighbors. One later recalled, she was laughing, talking, completely at ease. Nothing seemed unusual. Close to midnight, Mia left the Comet Tavern. She said she was going to look for her boyfriend at a rehearsal space nearby, but he wasn't there. Instead, she stopped by a friend's apartment in the same building and spent about an hour talking. Near 2 o'clock in the morning, she stood up and said simply, "I'm going to catch a cab back to Rainier Valley." Those were the last words anyone heard from her. After 2 o'clock, no one saw Mia leave the building. No taxi company had a receipt that matched. No surveillance cameras were operating in the area at the time. The silence stretched until 3:20, when a woman walking by discovered a body near 24th Avenue South and South Washington Street, just 1 block from a fire station. Firefighters and paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. When the medical examiner made the identification, it was confirmed to be Mia Zapata. One staff member admitted he followed the Seattle music scene and recognized her immediately. The autopsy reported Mia had been beaten, raped, and strangled with the drawstring of the hoodie she was wearing, a hoodie from the Gits. Saliva samples were collected and preserved. At that time, DNA technology was not advanced enough to analyze them, so the evidence was sealed away for years to come. Within the community, rumors spread that her body was found with arms outstretched. It was hearsay, never confirmed in official reports. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others believed it carried meaning. The public files left the detail unresolved. The next morning, when Mia failed to show up for rehearsal, friends started calling everywhere. Finally, one called the morgue and received confirmation. She was gone. The news spread fast, leaving shock in its wake. A member of the Gits later said, right away, suspicion turned inward. Everyone started to wonder if someone close could have been involved. In the days that followed, memories of Mia became a series of fragments. Some recalled the letter she had once written, the words, "The dark shadow always follows me." Others mentioned the old cassette labeled blue, with static-filled recordings that had vanished without explanation. These details, though far from the crime itself, haunted her friends with questions. For police, the case stalled from the beginning. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no taxi record. Nothing but 80 missing minutes. And that gap begins with a simple question. Which door did Mia walk out of that night? And why was there no trace of her passage, no cab receipt, no driver's testimony, not even a private camera to mark her final steps? Chapter 4. A city of music, suddenly drowned in fear. News of Mia's death spread across Seattle in just one day. For the local music community, it was a shock no one was ready for. A 27-year-old singer, standing at the edge of her biggest opportunity, was murdered in the heart of the city. The funeral came quickly. Friends, bandmates, and hundreds from the music scene filled the service. One member of the Gits remembered. Everyone was crying, but at the same time, everyone was looking around, wondering, could it have been one of us? Grief turned into suspicion. In the early 1990s, Seattle's music was at its height. Bands were drawing tens of thousands of fans. But after Mia's death, the atmosphere shifted. Musicians began carrying guns. Many kept knives in their pockets. The shows, once loud and free, now carried an edge of fear. One person later said, "We weren't just playing music anymore. We were watching over each other." Police questioned those closest to Mia, her boyfriend, her bandmates, friends in Capitol Hill. No one was charged, but the fact that word leaked only added to the unease. If it wasn't someone close, then who was it? And if it wasn't someone from the scene, why Mia? Rumors began to take hold. Some spoke of her body being found with arms spread like a cross, though the official file never confirmed it. Others speculated it might have been the work of a serial killer. There was no proof for any of these theories, but they deepened the fear. One detail stood out. Months later, several women reported to police that they were followed or harassed near the Comet Tavern. In one case, a license plate was recorded. That detail would later appear in the file, connected to Jesus Mezquia. But in 1993, police didn't have enough to make the link. Meanwhile, Mia's friends tried to channel their grief into action. They organized benefit concerts to raise money for private investigators. They founded Home Alive, a group that offered women affordable self-defense training. From one personal tragedy, a community movement was born, but suspicion never disappeared. Inside the scene, trust was shaken. One musician recalled, "Every time a woman didn't make it home on time, we all thought the worst." In the memories of her friends, Mia's personal fragments grew heavier with meaning. The letter with the words, "The dark shadow always follows me." The cassette labeled Blue, that once played at the Rat House, and then vanished. They became symbols of the unexplained, like the case itself. For years, police offered no clear progress. The case was quietly pushed into the cold files. But for her friends and the community, it never grew cold. They kept playing, kept building shows. But in their minds was always the same gap. Mia had vanished among them, and no one knew who was responsible. And the question lingered. If police never uncovered new evidence, would the case remain unsolved forever, leaving the letter and the cassette as haunting echoes, never answered? Chapter 5. A DNA sample, frozen for 10 years, and an unexpected name. After several years, Mia's case was officially placed in the cold case files. Her friends kept organizing benefit shows. Home Alive continued to run its classes, but in the police records, everything stood still. The only piece of evidence that still carried weight was a biological sample taken from Mia's body, including saliva from a bite mark. Back in 1993, technology wasn't advanced enough to analyze it, so the sample was sealed and stored in a freezer. By late 2002, Washington State's Cold Case Unit began reviewing old files using a new tool, CODIS, the National DNA Database. A technician reran the sample from Mia's case. The computer returned a result, a match. The name that appeared was Jesus Mezquia, born in 1955, a Cuban immigrant living in Florida. Records showed he had a history of violence against women and had once lived in Seattle in the early 1990s. After nearly 10 years of dead ends, police finally had a name. In January 2003, Seattle detectives flew to Miami. They tracked Mezquia for days, noting his license plate, waiting for a warrant. When he left his house one morning, officers moved in and handcuffed him. He was taken back to Seattle to face a murder charge. The only evidence, DNA. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no surveillance. Just a saliva sample that had slept in a freezer for 10 years. Technology had broken the stalemate, but it also raised new questions. Why was he in the exact area, at the exact time? One of Mia's friends later recalled that months after the murder, another woman reported being followed near the Comet Tavern. The suspicious car she described carried a license plate that matched Mezquia's. At the time, police couldn't prove it, but years later, that detail resurfaced in the files. It showed he had been in the neighborhood. Still, was it deliberate, or just a coincidence remembered only after his name came to light? For the community, news of Mezquia's arrest brought hope, but it also stirred unease. DNA could place him there, but it couldn't answer the deeper questions. Why Mia, and how did she fall into his hands? Chapter 6. Justice declared, but the void remains. In March 2004, nearly 11 years after the crime, a jury in Seattle found Jesus Mezquia guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence, 37 years in prison. Inside the courtroom, DNA was the cornerstone. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no cameras, only a saliva sample collected in 1993 and reanalyzed with new technology. For the court, that was enough. Mia's friend sat quietly among the crowd, listening to the verdict. One member of the Gits recalled, "I thought I'd feel relieved, but I didn't. Justice came too late, and Mia was still gone." Local newspapers called it justice delayed but delivered. Yet for many in the community, the feeling was hollow. Some still asked, did Mezquia choose Mia at random, or was there another reason? He never explained. Throughout the investigation, Mezquia refused to admit guilt, only acknowledging that he had once lived in Seattle. The trial closed, but the questions lingered. The rumors about the body's position, the mystery of the missing 80 minutes, even small fragments like the lost blue cassette. None of it was mentioned in court, yet all of it lived on in the memories of her friends. For Seattle's music community, the conviction did not erase the fracture. Many said the 1990s lost their innocence after Mia's murder. The shows continued, but the atmosphere had changed. One local singer reflected, "Before, we believed this city was safe for us. After that, the trust was gone forever." The Gits themselves never returned. After Mia's death, the band stopped, gathering only for memorial shows. In 1994, they released Enter the Conquering Chicken, the album unfinished at the time she died. Among the tracks was Sign of the Crab, a song about a woman killed by a stranger. Years later, listeners shuddered, as if Mia had been singing her own fate. When Mezquia was sentenced, a reporter asked one of Mia's closest friends if this was the end. The friend shook his head. No. It proves part of the story. But the loss never closes. In 2009, Mezquia appealed. The court reviewed the procedures, but the conviction held. He remained in prison until his death in 2021, at the age of 66. For some, that death closed a chapter. For others, it left the story unfinished, since the questions that remained would never be answered. Legal justice may have been served, but justice in memory, in the hearts of friends, remains an empty space. Was one verdict ever enough to ease the unease? Or will Mia's death forever be a wound in Seattle's memory? Epilogue. A voice that still echoes, but the darkness has not faded. The death of Mia Zapata was not only a personal tragedy, it left a scar across an entire community. From that loss, Home Alive was born. Mia's friends, together with women throughout Seattle, organized low-cost self-defense classes that helped thousands learn how to protect themselves. The movement quickly spread beyond the city, becoming a lasting part of her legacy. Music, too, played its role. Benefit shows followed one after another, featuring Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Joan Jett. An album titled Home Alive, The Art of Self-Defense, was released to raise funds for the cause. Music had once been Mia's dream, and now it became a tool to safeguard others. The Gits released their unfinished album, Enter the Conquering Chicken in 1994. Among its tracks was Sign of the Crab. To many listeners, it sounded like a haunting premonition, a woman murdered by a stranger. Her friends insisted it was coincidence, but the community never forgot the eerie resemblance. Years later, the documentary The Gits movie told her story, introducing Mia to a new generation. She was no longer physically present, but her voice remained, tied to the memory of a Seattle that was both radiant and shadowed. And yet, unanswered fragments remain. The old letter with the words, "The dark shadow always follows me." The cassette labeled Blue, with its static-filled recording, lost without explanation, and the missing 80 minutes of her final night. A gap that lingers even though her killer was convicted. Her friends said justice was served, but none felt at peace. The man responsible died in prison in 2021, yet the loss stayed whole. People still ask, why Mia? On that night? On that street? Was it only brutal chance? Or was there another thread, one never revealed? We may never know. One thing is certain, Mia's voice still carries, in her recordings, in the memories of her friends, and in Home Alive, where women continue to learn how to stand strong. And the final question lingers. Did the darkness of that Seattle night ever fade away? Or does it still linger every time someone speaks the name Mia Zapata?